My name is Diane, and I'm 54 years old. My own mother told me family should share everything, so I shared my $18,000 bonus with her, and a month later, she demanded I pay rent for living in my childhood home. For the last 28 years, I've worked as a hospital administrator at St. Francis Medical Center. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest, and I've built my entire life around being responsible, stable, and dependable. After my divorce 2 years ago, those qualities became my only safety net. My ex-husband, Glenn, walked out after 30 years of marriage, leaving me with a car loan, half a mortgage, and a lot of silence. I told myself that someday the universe would give me a break, and it finally did in the form of an $18,000 year-end bonus. That check felt like hope. I remember holding it in my hands, thinking of all the things I could finally do. Pay off the last of my debt, fix the roof on my little townhouse, maybe even take a quiet vacation to the coast. It wasn't just money, it was relief. It was proof that after years of putting others first, I could finally focus on myself. I wanted to be practical, maybe put most of it into savings, but part of me dreamed of using a small portion for something I'd never had, peace. My mother, Margaret, had other plans. Margaret was 78, sharp as a tack, and as stubborn as a brick wall. She lived alone in the house I grew up in, a white colonial with blue shutters and the smell of lemon polish always hanging in the air. After my divorce, she insisted I move back home, for comfort. She said, "No daughter of mine should live alone after being abandoned." I resisted at first. I had my own space, my routines, and despite the emptiness, I valued my independence. But my mother was relentless. Every call turned into a guilt trip about how she was getting older and how a house feels too big without family. Eventually, I gave in. I told myself it was temporary, just until I got back on my feet emotionally and financially. The first few weeks weren't bad. We shared dinners, watched old movies, and even laughed like we hadn't in years. But living with my mother was like walking on glass. Her kindness always came with strings attached. She had a way of turning affection into obligation, of using guilt like currency. I learned to keep my head down, pick my battles, and stay polite. When I told her about my bonus over coffee one Saturday morning, her eyes lit up with the same gleam she used to get before asking for something. $18,000? She said, her voice rising in disbelief. "Diane, that's incredible. Oh, honey, this must feel like such a blessing." "It does," I said, smiling. I was thinking of paying off the last bit of my car loan and putting the rest into savings. Her smile faltered just slightly. "Savings?" she repeated, stirring her coffee slowly. "That's smart. But life is unpredictable. Emergencies happen. It might be safer to keep that money somewhere accessible." "I'll keep it in my account," I said. She sighed. "You know how banks can freeze accounts or delay transfers when something urgent happens. Remember when Aunt Shirley broke her hip? If I hadn't had cash available, she would have been in that hospital for days waiting for care." "That was 20 years ago, Mom," I reminded her gently. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Sweetheart, I just think it would be wise if you let me hold on to it for you, just temporarily. I'll keep it separate, just for emergencies, yours or mine. We're family. Family should share everything." There it was, that word again. Family. The same word she'd used to convince me to move back home, the same word she always used when she wanted control. I hesitated, swirling my spoon in my coffee. Something in my gut told me it wasn't a good idea. But then she reached across the table and patted my hand, smiling softly. "I'm your mother, Diane. I'd never let anything happen to your money. You know that, right?" I wish I'd listened to the tiny voice inside me that whispered, "Don't do it." But instead, I nodded, forced a smile, and said, "Okay, Mom, just for emergencies." That afternoon, I transferred the money to her account. The transaction confirmation popped up on my phone, and she clapped her hands like a child. "See? You'll thank me later when it really counts," she said with a satisfied grin. For the rest of the day, I tried to convince myself I'd done the right thing. She was my mother. Surely she'd be responsible, but that uneasy feeling didn't go away. The next morning, I walked into the living room and found her on her laptop, humming happily. Shopping bags from high-end stores littered the floor. On her screen, an online boutique cart displayed luxury handbags, designer names with price tags that made my stomach twist. She didn't even look up when I entered. She just said, almost cheerfully, "You wouldn't believe the deals they have this week." And that's when I realized her version of an emergency was very different from mine. The emergency fund was gone before I even had time to call it mine. The so-called emergency fund turned into my mother's personal shopping spree. For the first 2 days, I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe those shopping bags were from some sale she'd been saving up for. Maybe she was just rewarding herself with a little treat. But by the end of the week, the hallway looked like a delivery depot. Boxes piled against the wall, glossy bags from designer boutiques, receipts peeking out of crumpled tissue paper. At first, I asked casually, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice, "New shoes, Mom?" She didn't even look up from unwrapping a silk scarf. "Oh, these? Old orders, honey. Just things I bought months ago and forgot about." It was a ridiculous excuse. The tags were from this season's collection. "Old orders?" I repeated. She smiled with that syrupy tone that always made me feel like a child. "Don't worry so much, Diane. You're always so uptight about money. You should learn to enjoy life a little." I bit my tongue. There was no point arguing when she was in one of her moods. But the next morning, another set of boxes appeared, and then another. It became a ritual. Me walking into the house, after work, to find her surrounded by new handbags, shoes, and perfume. The so-called emergency fund was vanishing before my eyes. One evening, when she went out to dinner with her church friends, I sat at her computer and opened her email. I felt guilty, but curiosity and dread pushed me forward. I typed "order confirmation" in the search bar, and my stomach dropped. Dozens of receipts filled the screen. $6,000 spent in a single week on things like designer purses, anti-aging serums, and limited edition jewelry. It wasn't just irresponsible, it was cruel. I closed the laptop slowly, my hands trembling. She hadn't even tried to hide it. My hard-earned bonus, the money I thought would finally give me stability, was gone, transformed into vanity and clutter. I wanted to confront her right then, but the thought of another argument made my chest ache. At work, I couldn't focus. My coworkers noticed. During lunch, my friend Janet leaned over and said, "Hey, I saw your mom on Facebook showing off that new purse. You must be such a generous daughter." I froze. "What?" She posted about it, said her daughter blessed her with a little luxury she'd always wanted. "That's sweet, Diane." I smiled weakly, though inside I felt humiliated. I couldn't believe she'd turned my stolen money into a public display of gratitude for something I never gave. It made me look like a doting fool. That evening I confronted her. "Mom, I saw your post." She looked up from her tablet, feigning innocence. "Oh, which one?" "The one about the purse you said I bought you." She chuckled, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be so sensitive. It's just social media. People love seeing pretty things. You sound jealous." "Jealous?" I snapped, my voice trembled. "You used the money I gave you for emergencies to buy all this junk. You promised it was safe." Her expression hardened instantly. Excuse me? Junk? These are investments, Diane. Quality lasts." "It wasn't your money," I shouted before I could stop myself. She slammed her tablet down, eyes flashing. "You moved into my house after your failed marriage, and you're going to lecture me about finances? Don't forget who took you in." The air went heavy. I'd seen her manipulative side before, but this felt different. It wasn't just selfishness, it was dominance. That night, I lay awake in my old childhood room, staring at the ceiling fan. I hated how small I felt again, like a teenager being scolded for questioning authority. She always had a way of twisting things until I doubted my own reality. When my daughter Chloe came to visit that weekend, I finally told her everything. She was 27, sharp and fiercely independent, with none of the hesitancy I carried. "You let her take your bonus?" Chloe said, eyes wide with disbelief. "I didn't let her take it. I gave it to her. She said it was for emergencies." Chloe sighed, shaking her head. "Mom, that woman has been manipulating you since forever. Remember when she guilt-tripped you into paying her property taxes 5 years ago? She's doing it again." I wanted to defend my mother, but I couldn't. Every memory Chloe mentioned hit too close to home. As we talked, I didn't realize my mother was standing just outside the door. Chloe, frustrated, raised her voice a little. She's a manipulator, Mom. Always has been. The next second, the door flew open. Margaret stood there, her face red with fury. A manipulator? She barked. That's what you think I am? After everything I've done for this family? Chloe jumped up. We're just trying to talk, Grandma. You shouldn't have taken her money. Watch your tone, Margaret snapped. You may not live here, but your mother does, and she'll be out if this disrespect continues. I stood frozen, my pulse pounding in my ears. Mom, please, don't do this. She glared at both of us, her lips trembling with anger. If you don't like the way I run my house, you can pack your things and leave, both of you. Her words echoed in the silence that followed, sharp as glass. I looked at Chloe, then at the woman who'd given me life but seemed determined to control it until the end. And for the first time, I wondered if this house had ever really been my home, or just another place where I'd been allowed to exist on her terms. The next morning, Margaret taped a notice of rent due on my bedroom door. It's surreal how quickly a mother's love can turn into eviction threats. One moment, she's telling you how families should take care of each other. The next, she's handing you a piece of paper demanding rent for the privilege of existing under her roof. When I woke up that morning and saw the notice of rent due taped to my door, I actually laughed out loud, part disbelief, part exhaustion. But the laughter didn't last long. When I walked into the kitchen, she was already there, waiting for me, a mug of coffee in her hand, and that satisfied expression on her face that always meant she'd made up her mind about something. Morning, she said casually. Did you see the note? Yes, I did, I replied, setting down my cup. Was that supposed to be a joke? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Not a joke, Diane. You've been staying here for months without contributing a dime. It's time. You learned that nothing in life is free. Mom, I said slowly, trying to stay calm. I've been paying for groceries, utilities, and helping around the house. I'm still looking for full-time work since the hospital restructuring. I'm not freeloading. She scoffed. You think cleaning a few dishes pays the bills? You're ungrateful, Diane. I opened my home to you out of kindness, and now you're taking advantage of me. Ungrateful. The word cut like a knife. For my entire life, that was her weapon of choice. I took a deep breath. I just need a little more time, Mom. Please, I'm doing my best. Her tone went cold. Then find the money. I want rent by the end of the month, $900. That's more than fair considering what apartments cost these days. $900. I stared at her, stunned. You're serious? Completely, she said, taking a long sip of her coffee. If you can't afford that, maybe you shouldn't be living here. My throat tightened. This is my home too, Mom. You and Dad bought it together. Her eyes narrowed. Correction. Your father bought it with his inheritance. And who do you think kept this place running after he passed? Me. While you were off building your career and ignoring your family. That's not fair, I whispered. She slammed her mug down. I don't want to hear it. I deserve some compensation for everything I've done. I raised you, fed you, helped you through your divorce, and this is how you repay me? By questioning my decisions? The argument ended there, not because I agreed, but because I couldn't speak. Every word out of her mouth twisted history, turning her sacrifices into debts I could never repay. For the next week, the atmosphere in the house turned suffocating. She barely spoke to me, except for curt reminders about rent due. Meals were silent. Even the air felt heavy, charged with resentment. I started sleeping on the couch, not because I had to, but because I couldn't stand being near her. My old bedroom, the one she'd graciously let me use, felt like a trap. At night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan, wondering how things had come to this. How a mother could look at her daughter and see nothing but a bill. Chloe called one evening, her voice soft but concerned. Mom, this isn't healthy. You can't keep letting her treat you like this. Come stay with me for a while. I can't, honey, I said. You've got your own life. I don't want to intrude. You wouldn't be intruding, she argued. You'd be safe. That woman, she stopped herself. Grandma is toxic. I smiled weakly, even though she couldn't see it. She's still my mother, Chloe. I just need to figure things out. The truth was, I didn't want to admit I had nowhere else to go. My savings were gone, thanks to her. My pride was cracked, and the thought of relying on my daughter made me feel small. The next morning, I came downstairs to find her sitting at the dining table with a stack of papers neatly arranged. She pushed them toward me. "What's this?" I asked. "Your rental agreement," she said matter-of-factly. "It outlines what I expect. $900 a month, due on the 1st. Utilities and groceries separate. I've already signed my part." I stared at her, my jaw tightening. "You're really doing this?" She looked up, eyes cold. "This isn't personal, Diane. It's practical. You can either sign and stay or pack and go." I couldn't believe it. My own mother had reduced our relationship to a lease. I didn't sign it. Instead, I went to my room, locked the door, and cried silently for the first time in years. Not because of the money, but because I finally understood. Her love had conditions, and I'd run out of ways to meet them. Later that night, while she was asleep, I wandered through the house like a ghost. I ended up in her study, drawn by a strange curiosity. Her old wooden desk was cluttered with unopened mail and yellowing papers. I don't know what I was looking for. Proof, maybe, that this house wasn't entirely hers. When I opened the bottom drawer, I found a locked metal file box tucked behind stacks of stationery. The label read, "Estate Documents." My hands trembled as I lifted it out. The lock was old, one of those flimsy kinds from the 90s, and I managed to pry it open with a nail file. Inside, beneath a stack of tax records, was something that made my heart stop. The original property deed, written in my late father's handwriting. His name, and mine, were both listed on it. My breath caught in my throat. She'd been lying. I held the document in my hands, realizing that half this house, her so-called property, was legally mine. My father's handwriting revealed a truth my mother never wanted me to see. The night I found that metal box, the whole world felt like it had stopped breathing. I sat on the floor of her study, my hands shaking as I pulled out the papers one by one. The scent of old paper and lemon polish filled the air. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. At first I thought maybe I was mistaken. Maybe I was misreading something, seeing what I wanted to see. But then I looked closer. There it was, written in my father's neat, deliberate cursive. "This property is to be held jointly by Margaret and Diane Carson." My name, my signature. Only it didn't look like my handwriting now. And it didn't look like the writing of a grown woman either. It was smaller, awkward, uncertain, like that of a teenage girl. That realization hit me like a punch. I remembered something, faint, foggy, buried under years of life and silence. I must have been 16 or 17. Dad was still alive then, though already sick. One night, Mom had called me into the kitchen. I'd been studying for a math test, I think. She told me Dad needed me to sign some routine forms. I remember the way her eyes avoided mine as she slid the papers toward me, telling me it was just in case anything ever happened. Dad was asleep in his chair that night. I didn't question it. I just signed. Now, decades later, the truth stared back at me in black ink. That routine form was a property deed. Dad had made me a co-owner, and Mom had buried it, literally and figuratively, for nearly 40 years. I sat there for a long time, the document trembling in my hands, my mind replaying that long-ago night in painful detail. Back then, my father was everything calm and steady in my world. Even in sickness, he had a warmth my mother never could match. I could still hear his voice. "Don't let anyone make you small, Di." He'd said that to me once after one of Mom's guilt trips. It felt like he was speaking to me again now, from beyond the grave. The next morning, I couldn't pretend anymore. I came downstairs clutching the deed, my pulse racing. My mother was at the table, buttering toast like nothing had happened. The sight of her calm, ordinary movements made me furious. "Mom," I said sharply, "why is my name on the deed?" Her knife froze midair. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "I found the papers, the house. Dad made me a co-owner." Her face went pale. Then, just as quickly, she composed herself, setting down the knife and folding her hands. "Oh, that. Yes, I remember that nonsense. It was just a precaution your father made me do while he was sick. It didn't mean anything. It was never official." "Never official," I repeated. "It's signed, notarized, and recorded, Mom. You've known this for years. Why didn't you tell me?" She sighed dramatically, as if I were being unreasonable. "Because you were a child, Diane. You wouldn't have understood. And later, well, what difference did it make? You were off living your own life. The house was my responsibility. That's not your choice to make, I said, my voice trembling. You've been using something that's half mine, locking me out, demanding rent, spending my money, when you knew I had every right to be here. Her eyes flashed, sharp and defensive. You wouldn't have handled ownership properly. You've never understood how to manage things. I kept everything in order. You should be grateful I did. Grateful. That word again. My hands tightened on the papers. You lied to me, I whispered. You let me believe this was all yours. She rose suddenly, towering over me, her voice shaking with anger. Don't you dare speak to me like that. I did what I had to do after your father died. You were a child, and I was the one who kept this family together. You have no idea what that cost me. Her tone was icy, but behind it I heard something else, a flicker of panic. I turned and walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. In my room, I called Chloe. She picked up immediately, her voice groggy with sleep. Mom, what's wrong? I found the deed, I said quietly. Half the house belongs to me. Dad put my name on it. There was a pause, and then Chloe said, Oh my God, she's been lying to you this whole time. Yeah, I whispered, and she's pretending it doesn't mean anything. Mom, you need to get legal advice. Seriously, don't let her gaslight you again. If your name's on that deed, she can't just push you around. The word gaslight made something inside me snap into focus. That's exactly what it was. Years of manipulation dressed up as motherly concern. After we hung up, I sat by the window, the morning sunlight spilling across the papers. My father's signature glowed faintly in the light, a final act of protection he'd left for me without me even realizing it. For the first time in a long while, I felt a small ember of strength stirring in my chest. That evening, when Mom went to bed, I took a photo of every page and emailed them to myself. Then, heart pounding, I dialed a local attorney I'd found online who specialized in estate law. Hi, I said, my voice barely steady. I think my mother may have hidden a legal document from me for years. I just need to know if what I have is real. The line was silent for a moment before the lawyer replied. Bring it in tomorrow. If it's what you say it is, you might own half that house. I hung up, staring at my phone, realizing I was about to uncover just how deep my mother's deception really went. The lawyer's voice on the phone confirmed my worst fear. My mother forged documents in my name. When I walked into the small law office the next morning, my hands were damp with sweat. I felt like a criminal, though I wasn't the one who'd done anything wrong. The lawyer, a calm woman named Rachel Grant, looked over the photocopies of the deed and the old estate documents in silence for nearly 10 minutes. Every tick of the clock felt heavier than the last. Finally, she looked up. You were right to bring these in, she said. These signatures show clear discrepancies. The original deed lists you as co-owner, but this later transfer, this one from 2008, removes your name entirely. My chest tightened. What do you mean removes my name? Rachel turned the document toward me, pointing to the bottom. This form claims you gave your full consent to transfer ownership to your mother. But the signature here, it doesn't match yours. It's a forgery, Diane, and that's a serious offense. I felt the room spin slightly. So she signed my name, pretending I'd agreed to give up the house? Rachel nodded gently. Yes, and according to the date, she would have filed this shortly after your father's estate settled. If this was done without your knowledge, it's fraudulent. The good news is, it's reversible. Legally, you still own half the property. The bad news is, undoing it will take time, and it may destroy your relationship. I stared at the papers in silence. My mother's looping handwriting filled the margins. Notes about insurance, mortgage adjustments, even a memo that read, File before Diane remarries. Every stroke of ink was proof of deceit. Rachel's voice softened. I can help you, but I need solid proof. Emails, messages, bank statements, anything that shows she's misused funds or lied about ownership. I nodded numbly. I'll get them. Leaving the office, I felt something strange, a mixture of justice and sadness swirling in my chest. I wanted to scream at her, to demand why she'd betrayed me. But beneath the anger was grief. This was still my mother. The woman who'd bandaged my knees, packed my lunches, and read bedtime stories when I was little. The same woman who'd become a stranger in her own skin. That night, I sat on my bed staring at the deed again, the pages trembling in my hands. The moonlight made my father's signature look almost alive, as though he were watching, waiting for me to finally stand up for myself. I whispered into the quiet room, "I'm sorry, Dad. I should have seen it sooner." The next morning, I called Chloe. She came over immediately, laptop in tow, determination written all over her face. "Okay," she said, rolling up her sleeves. "Let's build a case." For the next 3 hours, we sat at the dining table going through old emails and financial records. Using my mother's shared Amazon account and credit card history, we tracked every luxury purchase she'd made with my bonus money. Chloe printed the receipts, highlighting the total, $18,047.92, every cent of my emergency fund. "This is insane," Chloe muttered. "She's been treating your money like a shopping allowance." I nodded grimly. "We'll need it for evidence." I started recording our conversations too. Nothing invasive, just enough to have her own words if things went to court. Every time she spoke about her house, I'd press the record button on my phone, trying to capture the manipulation that had become second nature to her. But Margaret wasn't stupid. She sensed something had changed. Her eyes followed me more closely, her tone sharper, her questions more probing. "What's gotten into you lately?" she asked one evening as I cleaned the kitchen. "You're quiet, sneaky. You think I don't notice?" I smiled faintly. "Just tired, Mom." She stared at me for a long moment before turning away. I could almost see the wheels turning in her mind. Each night after she went to bed, I'd lie awake replaying everything. The woman who raised me had turned into my adversary. Every memory of warmth was now tinged with suspicion. The guilt gnawed at me. What kind of daughter builds a case against her own mother? But then I'd remember her laughter when I told her about my bonus, her smug satisfaction when she called me ungrateful, and the way she'd erased me from my father's legacy. That guilt hardened into resolve. When I told Rachel about my recordings and receipts, she nodded approvingly. "You're doing the right thing. But before we file anything formal, I recommend mediation. It might be less traumatic and less public. Sometimes families settle these things quietly." "Mediation?" I echoed. "Yes," she said. "We'll invite her to discuss ownership with a neutral mediator present. If she refuses, we'll move forward legally." I wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or terrified. The idea of sitting across from my mother, talking about her deceit like a business transaction, made my stomach twist. But I agreed. Anything was better than another screaming match at home. A week passed while Rachel began drafting the preliminary paperwork. During that time, my mother's paranoia deepened. She started locking her study again, guarding her phone like it contained national secrets. She even accused me of snooping through her drawers, an accusation that was, ironically, true. One evening, I was on the couch, scrolling through messages from Rachel when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and froze. Margaret stood in the doorway, her face pale, her jaw tight. In her hand was my phone. "How long?" she asked quietly, her voice shaking with rage. "Have you been recording me?" The blood drained from my face. "Mom, give that back." She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "What are you planning, Diane?" Her voice was low, almost trembling, but the fury beneath it promised that the next move she made would change everything. Nothing cuts deeper than hearing your mother call you a thief, especially in front of your own daughter. After that night, the air in the house was suffocating. Every creak of the floorboard seemed to accuse me of something. My mother barely spoke to me, and when she did, her tone was sharp, controlled, like a blade pressed to my skin. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet, things would cool down. But I should have known better. Margaret never cooled down. She just simmered until she boiled over. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. I was in the living room sorting through my paperwork, printouts of receipts, the deed copies, and a few bank statements. I wasn't hiding them. I just needed to keep everything in order for the mediation Rachel had set up. I didn't even hear her come in until her voice sliced through the quiet. "What do you think you're doing?" I looked up, startled. She was standing in the doorway, eyes wide, hands trembling, not from fear, but fury. "Going through my files again," she snapped. "Stealing my private papers?" "What? No, Mom, these are mine." She marched forward, snatching the stack from the coffee table. Don't lie to me, Diane. You've been sneaking around, taking things that don't belong to you. I should have known you'd stoop this low. I felt the blood drain from my face. Mom, those are copies of documents you hid from me. My name is literally on them. Her lips curled into a sneer. You think you can twist everything to make yourself look innocent. That's what you've always done. Play the victim. But this time, you won't get away with it. Mom, please. Don't mom me, she shouted. You've been stealing from me, recording me, plotting behind my back. You're a thief in my own house. I froze. The word thief hit me like a physical blow. It echoed through the room, bouncing off the walls, searing itself into my chest. Just then, Chloe walked in from the kitchen, hearing the commotion. What's going on? She asked, eyes darting between us. She's accusing me of stealing, I said bitterly. Margaret turned on her granddaughter like a storm. And you, don't you dare take her side. You think I don't know you're part of this? That you're helping her dig through my things? Grandma, stop, Chloe said firmly. Mom hasn't stolen anything. You've taken her money, her property. She's just trying to fix what you broke. Don't talk to me like that, Margaret hissed. You little girl, you don't know what I've sacrificed for this family. Chloe didn't back down. You've sacrificed her happiness for control. That's not love, that's manipulation. Margaret's face twisted with rage. Manipulation? You think you know what that means? Your mother owes me everything she has. Everything. That was the breaking point. I stood up, shaking. Owes you? I gave up years of peace trying to please you. I let you guilt me into moving back, into handing you my savings, into believing that every sacrifice was for family. But it was never about love. It was about control. Ungrateful, she spat. You're just like your father, always undermining me, always making me the villain. Her voice cracked, but her anger didn't waver. She stormed down the hall, muttering under her breath. I followed, pleading for her to listen. Instead, she threw open my bedroom door and started yanking clothes from the closet. Mom, stop! Get out of my house, she screamed, her voice trembling with fury. You want to betray me? Then go. Take your lies and your papers and get out. Chloe had her phone out by then, recording. Grandma, please stop. You can't do this. But Margaret wasn't listening. She kept pulling my things from drawers, tossing them into the hallway. Shoes, shirts, photo albums. It all spilled across the floor like debris after a storm. Something in me snapped. I didn't yell back. I didn't cry. I just stood there, watching the woman who'd given me life destroy every illusion I'd ever had about what family meant. When she was done, she pointed toward the door. Out, she said, and don't come back until you've learned some respect. I gathered what I could, just a bag of clothes, my documents, and the deed copies. Chloe wrapped an arm around me as we left. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely lock the car door. We drove in silence to Chloe's apartment across town. I sat on her couch that night, staring blankly at the wall. I couldn't believe it had come to this. I'd lost my home again, but this time, it wasn't to divorce or circumstance. It was to my own mother. When I finally called Rachel and told her what had happened, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said gently, Diane, it's time to make it official. File a property claim. You can't keep letting her control the narrative. I nodded through tears. I'll do it. Good, she said. We'll start first thing Monday. I hung up and sat there in the dim light of Chloe's living room, my heart aching with exhaustion and disbelief. The woman who used to tuck me in at night now saw me as an enemy. The next morning I drove back to the house just to grab a few forgotten things, a photo album, a sweater, a few papers. But when I pulled into the driveway, the garage keypad blinked red. Wrong code. Confused, I tried again. Still red. Then I rang the bell. No answer. Through the window, I saw her silhouette moving inside, calm, deliberate, like nothing had happened. She looked toward the door once, then turned away. That's when I realized she'd changed the locks. As I stood on the porch of the house, my father left me. The security alarm beeped sharply from inside, sealing me out of my own home. Walking into court against your own mother feels like betrayal, until you remember who betrayed first. The morning of the hearing, I stood outside the courthouse clutching a folder that felt heavier than any suitcase I'd ever carried. Inside were the documents Rachel and I had spent weeks gathering. Proof of forgery, proof of financial misuse, proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that love, when twisted enough, could become something poisonous. Chloe stood beside me, her hand warm on my arm. "You ready?" she asked softly. I nodded, though my stomach felt hollow, as I'll ever be. When we stepped inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of polish and tension. My mother was already there, sitting stiffly beside her lawyer, a tall, polished man with silver hair and a smug smile. She looked composed, too composed. She wore a cream suit, pearls, and that same cold expression she used whenever she wanted the world to think she was a victim. Our eyes met. Hers didn't soften. Rachel leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't let her get to you. We have truth on our side." The judge entered, and the room rose, then sat again. My pulse hammered as the proceedings began. Rachel started by explaining the case, that I, Diane Carson, was seeking reinstatement as joint owner of the Carson property, my childhood home, based on a forged transfer deed and fraudulent financial behavior by my mother, Margaret Carson. When my mother's lawyer stood to respond, his tone dripped with practiced pity. "Your Honor, this is a tragic family dispute. My client, a 78-year-old widow, has been unjustly accused by her emotionally unstable daughter of theft and forgery. The so-called evidence has been taken out of context by a woman suffering from stress and resentment." I clenched my fists under the table. When it was my turn to testify, I took a deep breath and walked to the stand. My voice trembled at first, but the words came easier as I spoke. I told the judge about the night I found the deed, the signature that wasn't mine, the $18,000 bonus that disappeared into handbags and perfumes. Rachel handed over copies of the documents, highlighting my father's original signature and the mismatched forgery that replaced it years later. "Mrs. Carson," the judge said, addressing my mother, "did you file this transfer document?" Margaret lifted her chin. "Yes, Your Honor, but with my daughter's full consent." Rachel stepped forward. "Can you explain, then, why the signature on this document matches none of her legal signatures on file, past or present?" My mother hesitated, her lips parting. She must have forgotten signing it. It was decades ago. Rachel handed the judge another paper. "And this, Your Honor, is a notarized handwriting analysis confirming that the signature is a forgery." The room fell silent. For the first time, I saw something crack in my mother's expression, a flicker of uncertainty. The judge looked unimpressed. "Mrs. Carson, this is serious. Forging legal documents is a felony." Margaret's lawyer interjected quickly, "Your Honor, my client was not aware of the legal implications. She merely wanted to simplify estate management after her husband's passing." But the judge wasn't convinced. He flipped through the evidence with slow deliberation, then asked, "And what about this?" He held up the printed bank statements, Rachel's trump card. $18,000 transferred from your daughter's account to yours, followed by numerous luxury purchases. Would you like to explain how that constitutes an emergency fund? Margaret's face flushed crimson. "It was a misunderstanding," she stammered. "She said I could use it." I felt tears sting my eyes, but I forced my shoulders straight. "No, I didn't," I said quietly. "I trusted you, and you took advantage of that." The judge nodded slowly. "I've seen enough." Chloe testified next, her voice clear and unwavering. She described how her grandmother had manipulated and belittled me, how she'd witnessed her throwing my belongings out and changing the locks. When she played the short video she'd recorded during the fight, the courtroom went dead silent. My mother's voice, shrill and vicious, filled the air. "You're a thief in my own house." Margaret's lawyer tried to object, but the judge waved him off. By the time the testimonies ended, the shift in the room was palpable. The arrogance my mother had worn like armor began to crumble. Her gaze darted from the judge to me, and for a fleeting second I thought I saw fear behind her eyes. The judge's ruling came shortly after lunch. His voice was steady, firm, and final. "This court finds that the transfer of ownership was made fraudulently and without valid consent. The property shall be restored to joint ownership under the names Diane Carson and Margaret Carson. Additionally, the court orders that Margaret Carson repay her daughter $9,000 in restitution for financial misconduct. $9,000, half of what she'd stolen. It wasn't everything, but it was justice enough. I felt tears welling up as Rachel squeezed my hand. Chloe let out a shaky sigh of relief beside me. My mother, on the other hand, sat motionless, her lips pressed into a tight line. When the judge dismissed us, she stood slowly, every movement brittle with fury. As I walked past her on the way out, she leaned close enough for only me to hear. "You'll regret this," she hissed. I met her gaze. "I already have." Outside, the sky was a clear, sharp blue. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Rachel congratulated me quietly, reminding me the paperwork would take a few weeks to finalize. Chloe hugged me tight, whispering, "You did it, Mom. It's over." But it wasn't. Not yet. When we returned to the house later that evening to begin sorting out logistics, something felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. The front door was unlocked. Drawers were open, curtains half torn. The air carried a strange emptiness, like something sacred had been violated. I moved slowly through the living room, my pulse pounding, until I reached the mantel. The space above the fireplace, the spot where my father's portrait had hung my entire life, was bare. The portrait was gone, and with it, the last piece of my father that still felt safe. I thought the court ruling would end it, but my mother had one final cruelty left. The day after the verdict, I returned to the house with Chloe to begin putting things back together. Legally, it was mine again, or half mine, as the court said, but emotionally, it still felt like a battleground. I'd imagined walking through the front door and finally breathing freely, finally feeling at home. Instead, what greeted me was silence and devastation. The drawers were open, the cabinets half empty, and the air smelled faintly of dust and perfume. At first, I thought maybe the police had searched the place, but then I realized it wasn't strangers who'd done this. It was her. "Mom." Chloe's voice trembled as she pointed toward the display cabinet where my father's antique watch and my grandmother's wedding ring used to sit. Both were gone. So were the silver candlesticks, the old family Bible, and the portrait of my father that had hung above the mantel since I was a child. I ran my hands through my hair, pacing in disbelief. "She took everything," I whispered. Chloe frowned, scanning the room. "It looks like she stripped the place bare." We walked through the house together, opening closets and drawers. Nearly all the heirlooms, the valuable things, gone. Even the quilts my grandmother had made, folded neatly in the cedar chest, were missing. It wasn't just theft, it was punishment. A final act of spite meant to remind me that even if the law said I'd won, she'd make sure I lost something too. A neighbor, Mrs. Porter, was watering her plants across the street. She waved me over hesitantly when she saw us. "I didn't want to get involved," she said softly, "but I saw your mother's car a few nights ago. She had it packed full of boxes, drove off just before dawn. I thought maybe she was moving." "Did she say where she was going?" I asked, my heart pounding. Mrs. Porter shook her head. "No, but she looked determined." Determined. That was my mother in one word. She never left quietly. For 3 days, I heard nothing from her. No calls, no messages, no word from any of her friends. I tried to be angry. It should have been easy. But what I felt was something more complicated. Grief. I wasn't grieving the stolen things, but the finality of it all. The sense that the last thread between us had been cut, and there was no mending it. On the 4th morning, I found an envelope slipped through the mail slot. My name was written across the front in my mother's familiar, looping handwriting. My stomach twisted as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Diane, you've embarrassed me. You humiliated your own mother in front of strangers and dragged our family name through the mud. You think you've won, but you haven't. The house means nothing without love, and you've destroyed that. I hope you're happy with your half of the ashes. Don't try to find me. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. Mother." I stood there, the paper shaking in my hand. Her handwriting was steady. No regret, no warmth, just bitterness carved into ink. Chloe found me like that, frozen in the doorway. She took the letter, read it quietly, then sighed. "She's never going to change." "I know," I whispered. "But I thought, after court, after everything, I thought she might finally let go." "She doesn't know how," Chloe said gently. People like Grandma can't stand losing control, but that's not your problem anymore. We spent that weekend cleaning what was left of the house. Every dusted shelf, every rearranged piece of furniture felt like reclaiming a piece of peace that had been buried under years of control. I painted the living room a warm cream instead of her cold gray. I replaced her ornate curtains with soft linen ones that let in the morning light. I hung new photos, me and Chloe, the hospital staff I'd worked with, even a framed copy of Dad's handwriting from the deed. It was my way of saying, this space is mine again. By Sunday night, the house looked different. Still scarred, still quiet, but lighter somehow. I sat in my father's old armchair, the one she'd never liked, and watched the sunlight fade across the walls. For the first time in months, I felt calm. Then the phone rang. It was late, after 9, and the name on the caller ID made my stomach flip. Linda Shaw, one of my mother's oldest friends from church. I answered cautiously. Hello? Diane, dear? Linda's voice was strained, hesitant. I wasn't sure whether to call, but I thought you should know. Margaret's been staying at the Lakeside retirement home. She moved in last week. She didn't tell anyone, just showed up with her things. I sank back into the chair. She's in a retirement home? Yes. She said she needed peace. She mentioned you. Not kindly, I'm afraid. I closed my eyes, guilt and exhaustion washing over. Thank you for telling me. After I hung up, Chloe, who'd been listening from the hallway, came to sit beside me. You're not thinking about visiting her, are you? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to. The other part doesn't think I can take another fight. Chloe squeezed my hand. You don't owe her anything, Mom. Not anymore. But as I stared into the quiet house, the one my father had loved, the one my mother had poisoned with her anger, I couldn't shake the image of her alone somewhere, angry and bitter, surrounded by strangers. For all her cruelty, she was still my mother. I went to bed that night, telling myself I'd think about it in the morning. But the decision came sooner than I expected. Just after dawn, my phone rang again. A number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a calm, unfamiliar voice spoke. Mrs. Carson, this is Nurse Talbot from Lakeside Retirement. I'm afraid there's been an incident. Your mother collapsed this morning. She's been taken to Mercy Hospital. The phone slipped from my hand as I realized that the woman I'd spent my whole life fighting might be slipping away before I ever got to forgive her. Seeing my mother in a hospital bed, frail and silent, broke something I didn't know was still intact. When I walked into her room at Mercy Hospital, the steady beep of machines was the only sound. The strong, sharp woman who had ruled every room she entered now looked impossibly small beneath a tangle of white sheets. Her hair was thinner, her face pale, her fingers clutching the blanket as if holding on to control one last time. For a moment, I just stood there, watching her breathe. So many emotions warred inside me: anger, guilt, sorrow, relief. I'd thought about this moment countless times, but now that it was real, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. A nurse entered quietly, checked the monitors, then gave me a gentle nod. She's been asking for you, she whispered. I sat in the chair beside the bed and reached for her hand. It was cold, fragile, trembling slightly. Her eyes opened slowly, and when she saw me, something flickered there. Recognition, hesitation, maybe even fear. Diane, she murmured, her voice barely more than a whisper. I'm here, Mom. She blinked up at the ceiling, her lips trembling. I thought you wouldn't come. I almost didn't, I admitted. Her mouth twitched into a faint, sad smile. Always honest, just like your father. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything unsaid pressing between us. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to ask why she'd spent her life turning love into something I had to earn. But looking at her then, so fragile, so human, I couldn't. Finally, she whispered, You hate me, don't you? I swallowed hard. No, I don't hate you. She turned her head slightly toward me. Then why does it feel like you do? I took a shaky breath. Because you made it impossible to love you without losing myself. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't want to be forgotten. When your father died, it was like half of me disappeared. I thought if I kept control of everything, of you, of the house, I could keep him alive somehow. But I was wrong. Her words cracked open something in me. For the first time, I saw not the manipulative woman who'd made my life miserable, but the lonely widow who'd been terrified of fading away. I was scared, she continued weakly. Scared that one day you'd leave and never come back. I thought, if you needed me, you'd stay. My throat tightened. Mom, all I ever wanted was for us to have peace, to love each other without conditions. She blinked slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. I know, I made a mess of it. Your father always said I held too tightly. He was right. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The machines hummed quietly, a mechanical heartbeat filling the silence. Then, in a voice barely audible, she said, I'm sorry, Diane, for the money, for the lies, for making you feel small. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was more than I ever thought I'd get. I squeezed her hand. I forgive you. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. You always were the better one. No, I said softly. I'm just tired of being angry. We talked a little more after that, about Dad, about childhood, about the garden she'd always wanted to replant but never did. She even laughed once, a fragile, breathy sound that filled the sterile room with something like warmth. When I left that evening, she was asleep, her chest rising and falling slowly. I didn't know it then, but it would be the last time I'd hear her voice. 3 days later, I got the call. She'd passed away in her sleep. Peacefully, the nurse said. The funeral was small. A few neighbors, some of her old church friends, and Chloe standing beside me, her hand steady in mine. As I watched the casket lower into the ground, I didn't feel hatred or triumph, just sadness and release. In her will, the lawyer informed me, she had left the house entirely to me. No conditions, no restrictions, just a simple line that read, to Diane, who kept fighting when I could not. I spent weeks afterward restoring the house, not for her memory, but for my own healing. I replaced the missing heirlooms with framed photos of the people who mattered. Chloe, Dad, and even a small one of her, from before everything turned bitter. I found a quiet peace in the stillness, in the hum of the house, finally free of tension. But I didn't keep it all. When the paperwork finalized, I sold the southern half of the property and donated the proceeds to a local women's legal aid charity, a place that helped women like me who'd been silenced, manipulated, or cornered by family. It felt right. It felt like turning pain into something useful. One afternoon, standing in the doorway of the freshly painted living room, sunlight pouring through the windows, I whispered a quiet goodbye to her. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't broken. I was free. In the end, I realized that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means refusing to carry the weight any longer. My mother had spent her life trying to control everything, terrified of losing what she loved. But in doing so, she'd lost the very thing she was clinging to. As I closed the front door behind me that day, the house felt different, lighter, peaceful, whole again. My mother taught me how to lose everything, so I could learn what peace really means. In the end, I didn't just win back my house. I won back my peace. Some losses hurt, but they free you from people who never plan to love you without conditions. Maybe that's what true independence really costs. If you've ever trusted someone who turned your kindness into a weapon, you'll understand my story. Tell me this. If it were your own parent who betrayed you like this, would you forgive them or walk away forever?